Social Studies 9. Hope everyone's doing good. Real quick little video today, just kind of finish off our lectures on Chapter 7 in consumerism. Real quick before we get into that, don't forget you had a lot of stuff last week, a lot of videos. Make sure you stay on top of that. They're all really informative and will really help you long term in the course and past the course. And then last week I gave you a marketing assignment. That's going to be marked pretty heavily, so make sure you get that done, hand that in. And yeah, and then today we're going to keep, yesterday you had another work day to work on that. Today we're going to finish the lecture section, like I said. I'll have a Google Meet today at 1 o'clock. And I really suggest you all come because I'm going to be addressing your last written assignment, which you'll get tomorrow. Will be another analyzing sources. So a lot of you struggle understanding what the sources are trying to tell you. And I'm basically going to tell you tomorrow, like what's some things to look for. So I really recommend you guys come to the Google Meet today because it'll really help with your written assignment, your last one of the year, okay? And then on Friday, you're going to have a quiz again. So stay on top of that stuff, okay? Away we go. So today we're going to kind of move on past marketing, which is the last thing we talked about. We're going to just some real basic stuff when it comes to consumerism in the world. So you'll hear this a lot if you watch the news, the idea of the GDP. So the GDP is the gross domestic product, is a way of measuring the wealth of a country. So how much wealth does a country's economy produce? And it's done on a per person basis. So for example, in 2007, and I could probably update this, but honestly didn't even think about it till just now. In 2007, the GDP in Canada per person was $33,000. So that is how much, it's a way of measuring how rich a country is, right? In the USA, the GDP was $46,000. In Mexico, it was $12,500. And that's done for every country in the world. Some are going to be richer, some are going to be poorer, right? So it's a nice way to see how a country's economy is doing. It's just like I say, it's just a way of measuring wealth of a country. What you need to know is that the higher the GDP of a country, the more they consume, okay? So if you look at this chart right here, the world's richest 20% consume 76.6% of the world's products, right? So US for sure, and China, I'd imagine, some other rich countries consume 76%. Us, we consume 70% of the world's, everything the world produces. 60%, so the world's middle class countries, consume 21.9% of the world's products. And the world's poorest percent consume 1.5. So you gotta think, is that really fair? Is that really the way it should be set up? Should the world's richest 20% consume the vast majority of the world's products? Or should it be a little more evenly split? Maybe if you're poor, shouldn't you get more products? So again, just something to think about, right? There is no right or wrong answer to this, but it's something to really think about, right? And again, the higher the GDP, the wealthier your country is, the more products you consume in the world. And this leads to something called income disparity. So disparity is a difference in inequality, right? So the average person here in Canada and the US has more than the average person in Mexico, okay? And that even just goes not country by country, but that goes city by city as well. So even here in Spruce Grove or in Edmonton, not everyone has the same prosperity, and you know that, right? There are people in our school that have done very, very well for themselves, and they're very, very prosperous. And there are people in our school who have not done as well for themselves, right? There's an income disparity. It's the same thing in Edmonton. Obviously, if you live in the suburbs of the south versus the inner city Edmonton, you're going to see a big income disparity. When I did my student teaching a long, long time ago, I worked on a north side school that was very, very poor. So there were lunchtime programs that every kid ate at. We delivered, not me personally, but a lot of people delivered food from the school to the household so they could have supper that night. To kind of put it in perspective for you, I remember I was teaching, again, student teaching. We were playing some baseball outside, and I remember at the end of the day, me and one of the students were cleaning up. The student ended up playing for the Eskimos after. He was a great kid. We found a crack pipe on the baseball diamond, right? You would never find that here in Spruce Grove, hopefully not, right? But those kind of things are linked to income disparity. So some factors that include that increase the likelihood of poverty, which is obviously another way of saying income disparity. If you're in a low income area, chances are it's going to be a very poor area. Single parent families, chances going to be a much poorer area. And then there's members of at-risk group, right? Refugees and elderly, they're going to be a higher risk of poverty. Moving on from that, since we're talking about consumerism, how can consumerism empower certain groups, right? How can the idea of buying stuff give people power? So in Canada and the US, consumers have the right to safe products. So that means there has to be regulation of food. There has to be regulation of products, right? You can't just make something and put it on the shelf. It has to go through a process to make sure it's safe for people. There has to be information about products. So, for example, there are laws against false advertising. You can't say something's gonna, you drink this and you lose 20 pounds, right? Healthy. You can't say that. There has to be choice between multiple products. So there are antitrust laws to prevent monopolies. So, for example, when IGA and Sobeys bought all the Safeways, Safeway, a lot of them had to move because now all of a sudden within an area you've got IGA and Safeway. Well, they're both owned by the same company. So if they either had to shut one down or they had to sell that Safeway. So in my area of the world, there used to be a Safeway. Now it's a co-op because when the IGA bought it, you couldn't have that many in the same area. So now it's a co-op. And they have the right to be heard. So there are government agencies that voice consumer concerns, right? So again, there are things that are out there to protect you as a consumer, right? If you buy a can of Coke today, it'll tell you on it what exactly is in it and how many calories are in it because they have to, right? They have to make sure that those things are given to the consumers, okay? So whether you're buying Coke, a candy bar, fruit, or you're buying a shirt, they all have to make sure that they're safe and they're protecting consumers. Let me refresh that. Governments respond to consumer pressure, right? Consumers have to put pressure on government because if they don't, the governments face consequences come election time, right? So, we have a federal government, a provincial government, and Mayor Stuart Houston and all that stuff, right? If we as consumers put pressure on our governments to make changes, they have to make those changes because if they don't, they're going to get voted out come election time. So as consumers, you have power. So keep that in mind. You have power. Now, if you want, you can click this link here. There's absolutely nothing to do with the class. It's just fun. It's from one of my favorite movies called V for Vendetta, where he talks about we need to take back the power as people. So he's talking about just people in general and how they gave up their power and their rights to be safe. Kind of links back to this a little bit, but it's just fun to watch. So if you want to watch that, go ahead and give that a watch. So there's got to be a balance, right? There needs to be a balance of the rights of consumers and the rights of business, and the involvement of government in the economy is a difficult one. So from earlier in the course, like pre-me, there's market economy, and there's on one side of the spectrum, and then there's completely government-run economies on the other side of the spectrum, right? So if we want to make sure that you as a consumer are protected, you as a business owner are protected, and you want to make sure that the government's not getting too involved, you got to try and balance that. So in a free market system, the rights of the business and the rights of the consumers should naturally come to an equilibrium with limited government intervention, right? So if we look at something like the USA, which is a completely free market system, business and consumers' rights should kind of balance out, right? Because if you don't make a good product, it won't get purchased, which means you go out of business. So you got to make sure that those things should come to a balance with very limited government intervention. Whereas on the other side, you've got a lot of government intervention, then you might have to put some more laws in to make sure that consumers and business owners are protected. Now, one other thing that a consumer can do to ensure that they have power is they can do something called boycott. So a boycott is a form of consumer activism involving the act of voluntary abstaining from using, buying, or dealing with a person, organization, or country, right? So if Coca-Cola does something that just really upsets us as consumers, we can say we're not buying it anymore. So whether it be you as an individual or whether you're getting involved with a group, right? You can just say, I'm not going to buy products anymore from you because you've upset me. So for example, PETA, like the environmental group, specifically with animals, encourages people to avoid buying fur, right? They want people to boycott buying fur because they think it's cruel to animals. You can believe what you want about that. I would agree with them, but that's just me. But there are other examples out there. Another example, which I always think about whenever I think about boycott, is the Olympic boycott. And you can click on that link there. Basically, it's happened a couple times where countries have boycotted going to certain Olympic Games because of something a government has done. So this one here is about the Summer Games that were held in 82, that were held in Russia. the USA, Canada, and a bunch of other countries boycotted those Olympics because Russia had invaded another country illegally. So this is a way of saying that they weren't allowed to do that, and it cost the Russians a lot of money. I actually had a friend who made the Canadian Olympic basketball team this year, but didn't get to go because Canada had boycotted those Olympics. So it's a really interesting 5-minute CBC video, so give that an idea. But again, the idea is boycotting is a form of activism, right? You just don't buy something or don't do something to try and put pressure on them to change their ways. So that takes us to the end of chapter 7, and I believe that will be my last lecture video of the year. There'll be more videos, but I won't be lecturing anything from the course anymore, just kind of be updates as we go. Stay on top of your work, guys. Reminder that the last day to hand stuff, anything in that I've given you in June will be June 18th, because I have to have my marks in, so I can't take anything else. Not trying to be mean, but I can't. I have to have my marks in. Those things are set in stone. Okay, so stay on top of things. As always, if you have any questions, you know where to find me. Later.